I want to draw their attention to the 2000 and 2002 America's Cup defence and the effect of that on the life of the Hauraki Gulf, and the forthcoming defence of the 36th America's Cup in 2021. I think this has serious implications for the biodiversity in the Hauraki Gulf.
Kia ora. Can I get you to answer that, Rochelle?
What have I ever done to you? Yeah, it's a very good question. I think one of the great challenges for the Hauraki Gulf in general is that it sits in the backyard of our most populated part of New Zealand. So it doesn't matter whether there's a special event or not. Any day there are, tens, hundreds, thousands of boats on the water, and there's been some really great recreational boat surveys done by NIWA, led by NIWA, that give a really good snapshot of what that looks like. And I think with that in mind, we're never going to stop that, and I don't think we should. I think we need to be part of it. We need to immerse ourselves in it and get our feet wet and our faces wet and all the rest. But I do think what's really important is that people are that they feel that they need to protect the Gulf, and by doing that, when they're out on the Gulf, they won't drive through a workup. They won't go fast at a flock of birds, that they will slow down or drive around or take their time, that they won't drop their rubbish over the side, that they, that they'll just suddenly feel this ownership of the place. That's not about them owning it, it's about them being part of it and of the stories of all the life that lives in it. And I guess that comes from a cultural shift, and that and this is one of the big challenges, I think, with fishing, because fishing is one of the biggest things that goes on in the Gulf as well, recreational fishing. And I think one of the stubborn places that's hard for us to move is bycatch of seabirds on recreational gear. So the industry knows all about it and what they should be doing and are making great leaps forward. But recreational people, that doesn't even occur to them. How do we make that occur to them? And then in turn, how do we make, when a big event like the America's Cup Challenge or similar event comes along, that people instantly go, where can we put this that it will have the smallest footprint? How can we run this that as little life as possible is impacted? Because the impact literally will be boat strike. That'll be one of the major threats. A busy, flat, calm summer's day out on the Hauraki Gulf, dead penguin, dead gannet, dead, you just see them. And all those birds didn't suddenly, their time was up and the great ticking clock of life. They got hit. And that's quite a common occurrence. So, I don't know that there's an answer, but I do think that it's, if we start thinking about the Gulf as not our place, but the place of many things, then hopefully those questions they may not even need to be asked, because council or regulating authorities will just go, okay, where do we put this, or how do we do this to have the smallest footprint?
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
Another issue is that we've done good work on a lot of the seabird work in the past 10 years, but we still know so little about seabird populations and what's going on. The Northern Seabird Trust, Auckland Council are doing good work, DOC is doing good work, but there's so much more that needs to be done to understand these populations and how they're being impacted. A good example of this, Tim Lovegrove from the council has got a good poster down the back there about spotted shag. So spotted shag in the Hauraki Gulf have declined hugely and now pretty much restricted to 1 or 2 breeding colonies in the Firth of Thames. We've recently discovered that these birds are genetically distinct from the rest of the country, and they appear to be winking out of existence, possibly because of ecosystem change, as I alluded to, possibly because of set netting, but we don't know. So it's just a critical lack of knowledge.
So just picking up the point that Rochelle was making, I think if you think about the language that we use to talk about our relationships, say even in the environmental sciences with with these other life forms and systems. We talk about resource management, for example. We talk about ecosystem services. You know, we persistently come up with models in which the networks of life, which include everything else, are separated out from the human networks and activities. Our sciences are part of the problem, I think. And I've been, because I'm an anthropologist, sort of coming up with the thought that a lot of this is very ancient. This is why it's so persistent. So, for example, if you go back to the book of Genesis, and God is giving Adam and Eve dominion over the plants, on everything that moves on the earth, the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, telling them to go forth and subdue the earth. These are very old habits of mind, very, very old. But as I was pointing out, in New Zealand we do have, and in the Pacific we have alternative frameworks which also have their European and Enlightenment equivalents of the web of life. And this idea of whakapapa, for example, are all intrinsically linked one with another, all these different life forms. And that works a lot better with contemporary science, with the science of complex systems, for example. So I think we're not going to change our behaviour until we change the way we think. I think a lot of these, if we think that these things are there to serve us, or they're resources for us to manage for our own purposes, we're going to keep on doing things the way we've been doing them for a long time, and I don't think the outcome's going to be good.
Okay. Brendan, you got something you want to add to that?
I was just, sorry, I was just,
It all in.
yeah, I was taking it all in and very impressed by the answers, and I will.
You're going to move it on? Next question from the floor. One more?
Just moving on from what Ross said, maybe...
Here we go. Sue? It works.
Just moving on from what Ross said, maybe we have an opportunity with the upcoming America's Cup to actually really up our game to show what we're capable of on an international scale. Maybe we've got 4 years in which we can really make some positive changes and show what New Zealand is and hold it, make New Zealand a leading light in everything that's good ecologically and in a conservation sense. So maybe it's a challenge.
And looking to clean up our own backyard first, Sue. How fine. Another question from the floor? There's one over here.
I just one for Brendan and Matt. I was really interested in that diagram showing the declining weights of the diving petrels, and brought to mind a wonderful talk we had from Peter Grant some years ago at the International Ornithological Congress in Christchurch, talking about his Galapagos finches and the changes in bill sizes when the El Nino and La Nina effect. I was wondering whether you might expect to predict a reversal if we have a phase or run of La Nina years, or is this, do you think, a trend that might continue into the future? With climate change and warming seas, possibly we might see a continuity and perhaps of more El Nino type effects rather than a return to a prolonged phase of the La Ninas, where we might see the weights revert back to their historical size.
Well, I certainly hope so, and that's basically what next week's trip is about, to hopefully find that they're starting to pull back up and come back up. But yeah, this is going to take something long term in order to really unpick that. So this is where, hopefully talk to me in 30 years and I can be a wizened old man and telling you that's the one.
That's one of the problems of working with seabirds, is that this understanding is born from long-term studies, and in New Zealand particularly, it's the same for Rochelle's work. There hasn't been that funding mindset of supporting long-term ecosystems-based research. So we're dependent on a few small studies of the sort of likes of gurus like Graham Taylor and the like, who have really been self-funding their work at places for decades. Yeah. So funding and support. Give us money.
Is it possible for one panel member to ask the others a question?
Sure it is.
Because they know a lot more about seabirds than I do. I remember a talk that was given some time back in the Hauraki Maritime, in this particular venue, about what's going on in the Hauraki Plains and the Piako and the Waiho rivers acting as nitrate pumps into the Gulf, basically. And I think of it every time I drive across the Hauraki Plains now and see all the cows, because I know exactly, you can see it's very marshy land, that's all going into the groundwater and it's going out to sea. And there was some research that was showing eutrophication that was ebbing and flowing seasonally around the Gulf. It got shut down, I think, but it was happening for a while. So do you think that sort of thing, I mean, the eutrophication, if that started happening in the Gulf, well, it was happening according to some of this research, at least seasonally, and that outflow of nitrates from these big pumping rivers, is that have you got any means of getting a handle on that for seabirds? Can't imagine it won't make a difference.
Look, absolutely, and I think any of the ecologists working the Gulf, can't deny that there's a likely effect of that. Certainly, I didn't show with those there's SHAG data that the carbon isotope data actually for both species pretty much shows a change in the carbon food web over the last 100 years, which to me indicates eutrophication. And a lot of those samples are coming from that Firth of Thames Gulf area. So I think without a doubt that has had an impact. But of course, again, we don't have the data to show what has been the scale of that impact. How wide has it spread? Rochelle, you got anything to?
But I think what our work does show is how localised the bird colonies forage, and so any colony that's foraging in that area is probably going to show a greater impact than as we head further out into the Gulf. And I would hope that's the case. But yeah, so again, with Matt's clarion call, we need more data.
Another question down here? Oh, you can ask a question, and then we've got one down here in the front.
Okay. I just wondered, we haven't heard anything about the Bryde's whales or the dolphins, really.
Settle in, people. So the Bryde's whales and the dolphins are, they're all fine, they're still out there doing their thing. The Bryde's whales, the major threat to them, of course, I think in the early years that I spoke at these gatherings was the ship strike issue, and as I said during my talk, that is to all intents and purposes solved. The ships have been going at about 10 knots for the last, 2014 through to now. And they're doing that voluntarily. It's a huge win. It really is. They've just embraced that and done it. And there were sticks and there were carrots and there were chocolates and there were arguments and hugs, but eventually we got there. And I think that's a really great piece of news, because we know that the Bryde's whale population will never be large. The Hauraki Gulf is a very productive place, but they're a very large animal and they require huge amounts of food. We know that their diet, I didn't talk about it, but part of the Plankton to Poo project was to work out whether the whales were feeding seasonally, because they are here year-round. And what we found is they actually aren't. They are actively seeking out certain types of prey, so copepods, the krill-like organisms, the little, shrimpy, red shrimps, those sorts of things, Malacostracans, and the real krill as we know them. But also they're seeking out salps, unusually, and arrowworms. So there are certain prey items that they prefer, and even when they're rare within the system, the whales will go and find them, which was very interesting to us, and that paper's underway at the moment. The other thing that we've kind of been really interested in, of course they also feed on fish, but we're very interested in this reduction in the number of big workups that we've been seeing, because those are something that nourish the sharks, the dolphins, the whales, the seabirds. Those are multi-species feeding aggregations that are really critical. And I've been asking MPI for many years about, data on removal of pilchards and jack mackerel. And I know it's not a massive fishery here, but it is a fishery, and I do query it, and they don't have the data on it. And that's of concern to me when we're thinking about, a sort of a holistic approach, because I think this reductionist approach to looking at single species is not doing probably many of us much good at all. It's the nature of the fact that we get given 10 grand and everyone thinks that you've, won the lottery, as researchers, and that's not okay. It's not okay. If you want the answers from scientists to these hard questions, you need to fund us, that we can form aggregations of, 20, 30, 50 bright minds to go right and move forward. And that's part of my talk, and part of, Brendan and Matt and I talk a lot as well. So, I think that this is the now moving forward, and also as, Anne was saying, it's about bigger thinking, it's about more integrative thinking and bringing in us and our boating and our fishing and all of those layers of information so that we can move forward. And I think that in a little way, the marine spatial plan, that Te Kapa Moana for the Haureka Gulf, that marine spatial plan, that was the little seedling, and we need to nourish that seedling, because we can propagate that and have other seedlings, and we will slowly build a forest. And I think we must not give up on that, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. And I think, fora like this are where we can, we should move forward with that. I really do. Kia ora.
We'll take one last question from down here in the front.
I find myself getting increasingly concerned about the issue of Auckland Port. And I know obviously we need a whole lot more research, but do we have time to do that research before someone makes a decision about what happens to Auckland Port, particularly in relation to the Firth of Thames?
So what is your question exactly?
What do the panel have a view on the location of the relocation of the port to the Firth of Thames, or aspects around that?
Winston's hoping to move it to Whangarei.
It's a wicked question. Yeah, and I think I'll be honest with you, it might not actually be a research question, a science question. This is a social question, and no matter where the port is now or where it will go or whatever, it will have a footprint, because that's the nature of it. But we have to have ports. We have to make our peace with that. There are many things as humans that we have to have. Okay, we can try and not have them, but it wouldn't last too long. We wouldn't have pretty much 99.9% of the stuff in this room without the port, I think. So I think it's more of a social question. And I think, scientists could definitely inform that with knowledge about the ecosystem function of a place, or whatever it might be, or organisms that might be displaced, much as we do around building aquaculture facilities or many other, facilities in and around the marine environment.
I would also add, if you asked me to give an assessment on hard data for top predators like seabirds, well, I couldn't. We don't have the hard data to assess what that impact would. So again, we need wider studies, more information.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask my team to stand up, because little do they know, we're going to sing a song, but we're going to ask you to help as well. So e tui tātou, and you as well. And because this is all about the birds, I'm sure most of you know Me He Manu Rere, okay? Toru pa, Me He Manu Rere,